Good morning, everybody. It's Will and Phil from the Knights of IOT here. I'm going to keep saying good morning every time because it's normally first thing in the day. Welcome along to our podcast video episode on thinking sustainability. That's going to be a hard word to say. We're going to do a little series on this, and Phil's going to take us through what the first part of that is.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Will. So thinking sustainability, we're going to figure out what that means to us as Knights of IoT. And we're going to work our way through it. How do we become carbon neutral as an organization, as people operating in the world? And there's two parts to that, measuring our CO2 and then looking at reducing carbon emissions and then balancing it by other means, whether it's carbon offsetting or any other means. And then another set of presentations are going to be looking at aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals released in 2015. There's 17 of those. We're going to talk about what that means to us. And then finally, we're going to look at those big tech companies, so Google, Apple, Amazon. What are they doing out there?
So we're planning a series of about 5 video episodes like this, right? And just dropping in a little bit on each one.
That's it. Nice, short and sharp. See what it means to us and generate some commentary. See where we go from there.
Super.
Net zero. And that journey starts with measuring CO2, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So Will and I have undertaken some carbon measurement using the carbonfootprint.com website. Will, how did you find using the Carbon Footprint website?
Carbon Footprint, I think, was quite easy to use itself as a tool, but the piece I found difficult was collating all the different data sources and getting everything together. Sort of trying to, I could get energy readings relatively easily from the supplier, but then trying to make estimates about other parts of my life. How long did we spend going into that and reviewing that? Like, is it more important to draw a benchmark and get some idea of the mix rather than the exact values, the detail of the values? That was the bit I found tricky. What about yourself?
Yeah, I was the same. So looking into my energy company and the smart measurements that they offer to us, and learning that my gas is actually not metered. It's quite incidental because it's just stovetop use. But it takes that going through that process to figure out, where do you get the data from? And then you start asking, well, is the data any good? And we'll probably talk a bit more about that as we look at our results. An interesting process to go through and building up that awareness of where we're using carbon and how believable is it. So, Will, you were comparing your results from carbonfootprint.com and the meter itself, and we'll go into that maybe a bit more. Let's look at our results from carbonfootprint.com. Mine are there on the left here and Will's there on the right, and I think maybe the first thing to jump to is the difference in number. So my carbon usage relates to 15.76 tonnes per year, and Will, yours 8.8 tonnes per year. So big difference between Australia and the UK straight away.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of that's to do with the amount. If you look, you invested a load more time in putting in some, medical. There's a few extra little bits on your pie chart. Your electricity usage is loads higher than mine. Also, your flights, I guess, where you live and coming home to see family is a big impact there. Just to mention my number, the 8.82, 2017, the UK average was 8.34. That's the last set of figures that I could find for the UK average. So I'm tracking the UK average number approximately, but really difficult to say when you're trying to type some numbers into a calculator that you think you found here and how you compared them against your smart meter. So just to kind of make comment to a specific piece of data here, the electricity and the natural gas number, that came out with a really low calculator, and I'll put the image up on the screen now for that piece. That came out with a really low number. My energy meter gives me a CO2 value that's about 5 tons. Carbon footprint gives me a value of about 0.6 tons. So I think there's a real difference in how things are recorded. It's that's the real challenge of this, is trying to understand what your impact is.
Yeah,
what about
absolutely.
You any thoughts on
I guess on pulling off from your comment on averages, the average from carbonfootprint.com is for Australia is 15.37. So I'm roughly aligned with that. I think context is really important. So I did my comparison for energy over a period, and that period relates to a COVID period. So I'm not commuting to work via train like I normally would, or a bicycle. I try and toss up between the two. But so yeah, it's very focused on me working at home full time, running computer equipment and things like that. So yeah, it's very focused on 4 months, and then that's extrapolated over the year, whereas your energy well was throughout the whole year.
I think mine was 31st of July last year to the 1st of July this year is about the longest period I could get for. And I tried to run it over a full year. You'll see, I'll put up a little graph now. It's got my S-curve of my gas usage, mine and Sarah's gas usage over the winter. Obviously we're heating more in the winter, so that's kind of readily apparent. I guess the car one is an interesting one. I think we talked about a lot of my car usage is work usage. What about yourself? I think you said you described it as incidental car usage, really.
Yeah, incidental. Well, what does that mean? It's weekend travel to, I don't know, day trip, or to the shops to get supermarket goods. My wife does drive a car for work, but I tried to isolate that on only my usage, just to give that kind of Knights of IoT focus. So that's the same for all those sort of secondary applications here, the insurance, finance, telephone. I divided it by 2 to kind of focus on me, but then does that matter? Because we're always going to be generating those costs, or carbon costs. So probably better just to go holistic.
The other thing I think from both our pie charts that's a big proportion is that finance piece, right? Like,
yeah,
I think we both interpreted that as our rent or mortgage payments each month, and I guess that I understand that there's some footprint behind that, and some, the company has to process that, but I didn't really equate paying my mortgage with, I don't know, 12.4% of my carbon allowance, to be honest. That seems like
quite a big chunk.
seems like a ton of carbon, effectively, to do my mortgage payment. I don't know.
And do you bank digitally? I mean, not giving too much away, but
I mean, yes,
so.
I do. Thank you, cyber criminals. Please stay away. Yeah. What does that finance piece mean? I guess that's an interesting point from us. Is how accurate do we think the numbers are? Do we think we're erring on the right side or the wrong side of those figures?
Yeah, and this is all just to paint a picture, right? So okay, yeah, there's lots of factors, and maybe they're, not as accurate as they could be. But the key thing about this process is that we've gone through it, and we've started to kind of build up this pie chart of where the impacts are, and then where we can start cutting them down. So car is an easy one to pick on. Food is a really interesting one, very carbon intensive, and you do it every day. I think did we rate ourselves as average meat eaters?
I think I even put low in mine.
Right. Okay. Well, we've got a veggie lasagna in the oven today, so doing my bit in that respect. But anyway, so it's about that pie chart and how it's distributed, so we can start thinking about reducing and offsetting. And I think it's a really good awareness piece for us, and we'll keep looking at this. And if we look back at energy, and we're trying to be more active in monitoring that, and I did a blog on Stand By My smart plugs, which is starting that process to go, well, how can I reduce my energy by cutting out standby usage? So we'll see how these things can kind of build into our blog content and where we go from there.
And I think there's probably a follow-up there to talk about energy drain, isn't there, of the smart plug consumption versus the things that you're saving power on. I was doing a bit of research on what is the drain on, smart light bulbs, because they're on and functioning and ready to go. So there is a natural power drain to those. And is it worth the cost of, are you saving more than you're gaining? What's your return time? So
cool. Yeah, and that's a good point to end on, that each device has a different carbon usage or from its whole of life kind of process, and we need to be more aware of that, and maybe we can touch on that when we look into big tech and what their devices, or what they're doing and what their devices offer. But yeah,
super. Well, thank you everybody for your attention there. Hope that was of interest. We're trying to understand these things and work through them together. It's an interesting process, just collating the data. I guess my view is I'd encourage everybody to have a go, put your carbon footprint in and have a think about those things. We think it's something that's important to us.
It's super easy. And don't get lost in the detail, but start going through that process. Challenges on some of our figures, and let's work together to be more carbon aware and work towards that net zero target.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks everybody. Take care.
See ya.